Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have a very special guest, Chris Snyder, to talk to us a little bit about whips and coils, how its importance in athletic performance, just along with some of the overuse and injuries that we see if you do not have a proper whip and coil. But Chris, tell us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Chris Snyder was a former professional athlete, college and professional athlete. Played football at college football at Penn State, where I played defensive end started a couple years there. Got a chance to play some professional football until I was about 35, somewhere in there. Have a degree in exercise science from Penn State, and have always worked in the exercise science field. Not everybody uses their degree for in the work world, but I've always worked as a strength and conditioning coach in some capacity, or a performance coach since I've gone to Penn State. I'm a CSCS. I've worked with pretty much every type of athlete you could think of. Lots of stick and ball sports, basketball, a lot of football, since I was a football player. It's just kind of a natural type of athlete for an ex-football player to work with. So lots of offensive, defensive line, kind of specialize in some things there. And then some martial arts, some boxing in there. I have a background in functional range conditioning that I love. I've worked in motorsports racing for 25 years now. It's been a really interesting journey to continue using my education to help pit crew athletes, drivers to perform at their best.
Awesome. Very decorated, very humble. A little bit about Chris, if you didn't know, but every time Chris travels, he loves to find a local gym that has unique, old, super cool equipment. So this guy knows it all. If you have any questions about what you should get and what works, he's the man to ask. But without further ado, let's get into some of our questions today.
All right, awesome.
Recently, you have worked with athletes of all different ages and levels. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what you've seen in youth today.
I see there's an overabundance of reliance on heavy weight training with athletes, and very little transfer to the field, whatever that field that is, field or court. Most strength coaches now seem to, and it's been like this for a long time, but we seem to still be just pushing heavy weights, which I'm not opposed to, because I do believe very simple strength training is best, but there's not a lot of knowledge or effort put into transferring what you're doing in the weight room to the field or court or whatever that may be.
Okay, and let's say you're starting with a youth of age 10. What at that age range is generally the goal for a 10-year-old when first getting them to work on athletic performance?
I think with a 10-year-old, it's good just to get them some basic knowledge of how to create force in general, and not necessarily power at that point, but just how to apply force and create torque around a joint so they can apply force into a weight or whatever they're trying to do. If it's sled pushing is great, I think, for everybody, and it's safe for kids. So just think about how a kid can position their body and push into a sled a little bit harder.
Okay, let's take that same kid is now 13, 14. What changes?
A lot of times you start to get more specialized into a sport, soccer, baseball, whatever it may be, and you kind of lose some of the general training in there, and it just becomes very only sport related. So they'll go from the weight room and directly to their sport, and they almost overplay their sport at that point. That's what we're seeing with, at least in the kids that I've worked with.
Let's dive into that a little bit deeper. Overplaying your sport. What does this mean? What do you see?
Well, there's kids that lack basic underlying ability to handle their sport. So their tendons aren't strong enough. They don't know how to rotate their torso, to create rotational power if they're throwing, and they'll end up overusing one joint and not using their whole body to do that. Football players will tend to, they'll overuse. Most football players, if you really look at them, they're just pelvic tilt is spilled forward. They have a lot of anterior pelvic tilt because they're in the weight room squatting all the time. And I was one of these kids too. But they'll end up having hamstring issues a lot of times, in my opinion, because of that pelvic tilt. So we're building them up in a weight room to do a heavy squat, and they get all this anterior pelvic tilt. So we put them in this locked position and then go, okay, we're going to go run sprints, and then half the kids have hamstring issues because when you put them to anterior pelvic tilt, it puts a heavier stretch on that hamstring complex. So, but there's just not a lot of transfer. So kids, when they're younger, they're probably not in as good of physical condition as they need to be in, and then we go and ask them to do a sport where they get overtired, then they get injured, so they're not conditioned enough to stay at a high enough skill level as a practice or a game goes along. So then we just put them at risk because they're running around and flopping around the field, getting tired, and then they get hurt.
So for sports that require rotation, you're talking about over-rotating, having anterior pelvic tilts. Let's say you are over-rotating in a sport like, I don't know, volleyball or tennis, and you still maintain this anterior pelvic tilt. What are you at risk at for?
Well, I think pretty much anything in the body. If you're
What have you seen? Have you seen any sort of specific injuries?
Well, yeah, we've seen a lot of knee injuries from athletes that lack the control in their pelvis, just to pick one area, and it just, when they go to absorb force into the ground, when they land or they jump, if you watch in slow motion video, there's so much slop in the whole system that it's almost unimaginable that they would even be able to stay safe while doing their sport. And a lot of times you can't see it with the naked eye. Slow it down, and you can just use a phone. Slow it down, and you can watch just the slop in the kinetic chain, or just in their legs and their body as they're trying to jump or to land on one leg. So we're most of these sports are unilateral, so they're on one leg, they're jumping off of one leg, shooting a ball with the other, or whatever it may be. You're never in a weight room position for the most part. So where you're in this perfectly aligned barbell back squat position.
So what do you see in the weight room? Maybe kids are training at a high school facility that might be helping some of these issues. And what might you see perhaps where they're not getting some of the overall training that they might need?
Well, I'll give you an example of just my blue collar approach, I guess, to transferring some of the weight room to the sport and teaching basic things that you need for most sports. And I use boxing, so I use very basic boxing drills that I learned a long time ago, and I really haven't changed those. But it teaches athletes how to to transfer force from the ground up and out through their hands, and to be able to move in this almost rotational force generating pattern. And I like to do it in the weight room. Boxing, basic boxing, we're not talking Mike Tyson stuff here, but basic boxing, hitting focus mitts, which are, if you don't know, little pads that a coach will wear on their hands. And you can, most coaches could even do it. They could just come up with little drills to do, but you can teach athletes very quickly how to create rotational force, which is used in most sports, boxing or baseball, softball, volleyball, football. It doesn't really matter. And it's such a simple way to kind of trick athletes into learning how to transfer this linear weight room activity into more rotational work.
So leading off of some rotational work, the whole purpose of us coming together today was to talk a little bit about whips and coils in the athletic world. So let's first just sort of define what that is. What is that?
Just keep in mind, this will be a blue-collar
We'll take it.
blue-collar explanation of what a whip is. There won't be a Encyclopedia Britannica explanation, but in my opinion, and my how I'd use it, a whip is just a way of loosely moving a joint or moving a limb with a really hard stop at the end. Okay, so a punch, if you look at it, it's really a whip. If you look at somebody, if you watch somebody hit a baseball, it's a coil and a whip. Okay, and if I wanted to just throw a frisbee, all right, that's a whip, all right, with a block at the end. The block at the end is where the power is transferred into the object. A punch, the same thing. The arm has to go out in a very loose, fast manner with a hard stop at the end. So if you watch somebody actually use a whip, it's very loose. The end of that thing is very long and loose with a hard stop at the end, and that power is at the end.
Okay.
So we're trying to, you couldn't just take the end of that whip and just push it straight. You wouldn't have any power. It would just kind of and fall on the ground. But that long motion, this whipping motion, allows for that object, whatever is at the end, to move through a really long range of motion in a short space. So you increase speed and a hard stop at the end. So
sport like volleyball.
Sport like volleyball.
Overhead.
Overhead, yes.
Okay, this is like a whip motion.
That's a whip motion.
Okay, and the force gets transferred and goes all the way through. Tennis.
Same thing.
Okay.
Same thing. You would, if you took a bodybuilder that was real big and stiff and they just were pushing the tennis racket, they wouldn't have any power. But it's this whipping motion of the tennis racket with that hard stop once it hits the ball. That's the whipping motion.
Why is it that important?
Oh, it's for power generation. It's for efficient power generation too. Because if you were just always pushing and just muscling things, you would get tired fast. You wouldn't get any power on a ball or a punch or while you're sprinting. So the arm action in sprinting is also a whipping motion. So, and if you watched a sprinter and they just clenched their hands and just like powered through, they're not going to be as fast as an athlete that can loosely whip that arm with a little bit of bang at the end. So when our arm comes back, it has to be a whipping motion, not a big whip. It's a very subtle whip, but it is a whip.
Okay. What about a coil? What is this?
Coil is the same thing. So you're trying to, and it can be a joint or through the torso or through the whole body. You're trying to coil to create an elastic, like reserve of energy that in turn allows you to uncoil quickly. So it's another way to efficiently generate speed and power for specific movements. So and it allows you to do it in a very small area, like sport. So if you're in a confined space or you have to do something, you have to generate power very quickly against an object, it's beneficial to be able to coil and release quickly. And we're loading elastic energy that is unloaded in a very small geographic space, but it allows for a lot of linear or non-linear motion. So, but if you really looked at it, the force is generated over a long distance, but it's done in a very small space.
How is this currently taught to athletes in a traditional strength and conditioning setting?
I don't think most of the time it is taught at all in a strength setting.
Okay, where is it taught?
I would think that most of the time it's taught in the sport itself.
I see.
So, but it's very sport specific. So, I'll give you an example. What I see with baseball players is a lot of baseball players are lifting weights. They're getting stronger. I think that's great. But a lot of what they're doing is not really transferred directly. There's no middle ground in the weight room to the baseball field. And you're just relied, you have to do your stretching so you stay loose. And then you go over here, you do skill work. But there's no real bridge between these two things. And I think some people are trying to do it. Definitely. There's people out there creating some systems and some exercises that you'll see on the internet, and they try to do that. I see a lot of very overly complicated things that I don't understand.
So would you say this concept of transferability for things like whips and coils in order to develop power is lacking for most athletes?
Oh, 100%.
And should they attain this type of skill, it might push them forwards quicker?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we do this? How do we go about creating this better transferability for our athletes?
I think strength coaches that have a lot of pressure on them to produce, for kids to produce high numbers in the weight room, bigger squats, bigger bench presses, and it's all sports. There's a lot of pressure on these folks to put up big numbers, but there's no real pressure on them to teach kids how to move efficiently to where it transfers to the field itself. And over the years, you'll see athletes, and they'll talk about, I do yoga, or I do Pilates, or I do martial arts, and I think those systems all have a part to play. That martial arts could be a game changer for an athlete that is a stiff, doesn't know how to move their body and generate power athlete. But I don't think martial arts alone. I still think you have to build this resilience through the weight room. I think it has a lot of benefit. Getting a bigger back squat helps build bone density, tissue resilience, tendon strength in a safe way. But you also don't want to take somebody and with a 40-pound medicine ball and slinging it around and standing there and just like throwing it against the wall repeatedly. I also don't think that is necessary. And maybe some of that stuff is fun, and I certainly like to do it, but I don't think you need a 40-pound medicine ball with a 10-year-old kid thrown against the wall to teach them how to hit a baseball better. So some of it's, it's really basic things. I think you teach them how to throw a punch on a pad. I think some of the things that you would get out of Pilates is really going to help them, as opposed to a kettlebell swing sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Not that a kettlebell swing is bad, it just has a different purpose.
Mm-hmm. So you're familiar with the movement system, the gyrotonic method.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how that felt in your body when you were participating.
Well, for me, I think it allows you to go from this exterior, geared training, like where we're kind of training from the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
Gyrotonic is more training from the inside out. And so is Pilates, a lot of martial arts. But Gyrotonic actually teaches you how to rotate the joint from deep within.
Mm-hmm.
To get at the really root level, to free up motion, but also so you can feel what that feels like throughout the whole joint, to use the whole limb for a coil or a whip
Mm-hmm.
at the end.
So talking about transferability and trying to create whips and coils for our athletes, and this might be a movement system that could really help an athlete.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a method that can be used extremely safely too.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas there's risk when you have somebody punching something, doing boxing, martial arts, they could injure a hand, a wrist, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
But gyrotonic systems like Gyrotonic are going to be much more safe, a lot more technical. So it takes really good instructors to teach that.
And what about the importance of like a strong, stable core in order to generate power or create a strong whip? What is its contribution to the overall picture?
Depending on the sport, it would be the transfer point from force coming up through the ground, off the ground. So this driving up through the ground, through the torso, out through the hand, or somewhere in the upper body. If you don't have a strong torso, you just leak all this energy out.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's a little technical, but if I showed you a video, you would see just this. You would see the body just kind of crumble a little bit, or just become a little misshapen as we try to drive through and out the hand.
Mm-hmm.
You would see flexing or overextending, or this kind of like rotation and flexion at the same time.
Bending.
Yep. So you'd see a lot of extra motion in there that is not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So the transfer of force through the feet out through the hand is not going to be nearly what it should be.
Mm-hmm. So an athlete really needs to start developing better force and torque.
Yep.
What should they be doing?
I think they should do drills that are unweighted at first, and do them slow. And you could take athletes, put them in a mirror, and just kind of have them do some things where they're driving off of their left foot and just coiling their body, just feeling energy stored up through their body and out through their hand. They could throw light, just ping pong balls at the ball. Mm-hmm. And just do it really light. If they tense up, even with a wiffle ball, the ball's going to go all over the place. But they're going to be more efficient, and the ball's going to travel faster if they learn to do that without any weight first. So, and I think you, just like sport motion, you break that down. So get athletes, okay, if I'm going to have you do an exercise where I need you to initiate the motion off of the ball of your left foot. That's what we're going to do, is we're just gonna feel your foot in the ground, driving into the ground, and then break that down, and then we start to, a coach can kind of push into the shoulder if we're trying to rotate into the shoulder. Mm-hmm. Those types of things. So we really start to just break down and segment a longer motion, which is great. That's what it's easy to do in gyrotonic, because the whole system is designed to start small, break little motions down, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger, right?
Yes, and more expansive.
Yep. Yeah, it's quite impressive to see how much, if it's like slow whipping and coiling. The goal is not to necessarily, in that system, was not necessarily to be an extremely powerful athlete, but if you watch the progression, you could totally use gyrotonic for all that.
When you were an athlete at Penn State and your arena football years after that, was there any coaching on some of the topics that we're talking about transfer and torque and force, and what was the conversation then?
Zero.
Okay.
I don't think people really looked at it that way.
And when did this start becoming a topic within the athlete world?
You see it quite a bit now. There's some systems out where people are actually talking about coiling, and there's different ideas on it, but they seem very complicated to me when I look at them, and probably difficult to teach. Like, I don't feel like I need to do a $2,000 certification to teach somebody how to coil and whip. There's very basic things, like doing basic boxing, I think works extremely well for most athletes, in a nutshell. But,
And talking about an athlete that's trying to whip and coil around their spine, we've seen injuries. We've seen spinal fractures.
Yep.
We've seen abdominal tears. We've seen shoulder injuries. We see athletes that are trying to do this that don't have the upper body extension or movement to do this. So how would you go about teaching this athlete all of these things? Where does it start? How do parents keep their kids safe and growing well while participating in a world where we are already overplaying all of our sports all year round?
I think for parents, try to be observant of your young athletes. Most things, when they're off, they look off, and when they do, you need to get help. And you could ask the coaches that are working with your kids, this to me looks off, and my kid's complaining about their low back hurts. Why does their low back hurt? And you can typically see it in their motion. They'll be overextended in their back, like really arched in their back while they're, in volleyball, while they're trying to hit a ball. It's because they're not able to transfer force efficiently and just do the motion efficiently enough, and they're just using their low back. They're just smashing vertebrae down into the low back, even when they're jumping off the ground. And then they're landing, and their body's all over the place. Even if when you look at it at first, it doesn't look like their knees are here, there, and everywhere. Just pull your phone out and take a video. If your athlete's not hitting a ball very well or efficiently, or they're injured all the time, just start to video them, and you'll be able to see it.
Recurring injuries, like you just said, we have an injury here, and then your athlete goes and gets physical therapy, and then they come back and they get another injury somewhere else, and we're just sort of on this hamster wheel of injury, but they continue to just work through that single injury to get cleared to play again, and then they get injured again. What are your thoughts here?
Well, there are norms on what the range of motion in a joint should be, and that's internal, external rotation of the limbs, the arms, legs, things like that. It would be beneficial if they're getting injured to find a therapist that will actually do a thorough movement assessment on your kid. They can at least go through and check range of motion in most of their major joints. If one side is considerably different than the other, you probably have a problem. If they have tenderness in their low back, if their knees are hurting, you probably have a problem. If you look at their feet and their feet are collapsed towards the midline, and they don't necessarily have flat feet, but they've started to collapse in or they buckle in, the knees cave in towards the midline, you probably have some things that you need to correct first, or at least protect against.
We're in this world now where, as an athlete, at any level, you can earn a wage, but your body perhaps is not able to take this beating, so we're sending athletes back to play before maybe they're ready, especially at the high school level where they're competing for spots at a collegiate level. I mean, at what point do you have to bench this athlete, or at what point do you have to have tough conversations with these kids?
Yeah, I think we've had a few of those conversations. I think for the longevity of that athlete to actually be able to play at a high level, sometimes you have to convince mom and dad and the athlete to step away to get some proper physical rehabilitation, work with a strength coach that's gonna take your needs first into account. A lot of the high school strength and conditioning coaches, and even college and professional, they have so many athletes that it's hard to take everybody's individual needs into account. It's almost impossible. So there should be some crossover between the private sector and the performance, professional teams, the college strength and conditioning coaches. There has to be a give and take there for the coaches to find people in the private sector that can help work with their athletes, or other people in their school, their university that can work together, multidisciplinary fashion. So,
and what kind of, in your experience, is this something that weight room coaches that work with many athletes are willing to do? Is this a supportive method, or is there a lot of resistance?
I think there's more strength coaches that are willing to work with the athletic training staff and the medical staff now than there ever was, because it's just there's pressure on it, and it's more effective when you have the medical staff can work efficiently with the strength and conditioning staff. You have a much better program. I still think it has a long way to go. There's a lot of resistance at all times between the two worlds, and each one sometimes tries to do what the other one's trying to do.
Yeah. So for parents, what's your advice for parents to help keep their kids developing the skills they need in a safe way when many of these young bodies can't handle a lot of the load that they're getting?
I think you almost have to look at percentages by their age and experience. If they're 90% of the year they're just doing their sport, you're seriously asking for trouble. If their athlete is only doing one sport for 70% of the year, you have serious trouble coming. And you need to find ways to diversify their movement, what their movement diet is, I guess, if you want to call it that. You have to feed them more than just their sport, or else it's just an overuse game.
Great analogy.
Yeah. It's just an overuse game, doing the same thing repeatedly. If you swing a hammer all day long, well, there's just things in that arm that are going to start to go over time. You're just hammering away at your joints in the same manner, without any variety. So and there has to be some rest period throughout the year, but also just some basic, like really good quality athlete development work. You know, take a tennis player and teach them how to run a proper sprint straight ahead. Sprinting can really be used with most sports, just straight line, it's safe, effective to teach speed and power. Even, you know, you're really just looking at training the nervous system. So having kids doing basic speed development work, but they have to run fast. They can't just be doing high knee drills. That should be maybe a little bit of it, just teaching basics, but you gotta be able to move fast in basic patterns. And then, you know, try to set aside some off-season period for your athlete where they're not allowed to do a lot of skill work. And maybe their skill work is done, if they're a basketball player, yeah, you can go shoot basketballs every day if you want, but you're not going to work with a coach. And maybe it's one day a week you work with a coach. But it's as far as the part of the diet is a very small part. And then you ramp that up and you feed more carbohydrates or more, you know, of the skill work involved in the sport as you get closer.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.